Hello and welcome back. Happy Monday. We talked about the domain Eukarya. We are still in the domain Eukarya. We talked protists and fungi on Friday, and today we are starting on the plant kingdom, Kingdom Plantae, my personal favorite. So, let's talk plants. Plants, unlike fungi and protists, are 100% multicellular. There are no unicellular plants. If they are, they're lying. So, plants are always multicellular. They are always autotrophic. They always have a cell wall made of cellulose. Cell wall of cellulose. If you remember, fungi also have a cell wall, but theirs is made of chitin, which is the same stuff that makes up like a beetle's exoskeleton. Plants their cell wall is made of cellulose. Oops, I erased that. That's fine. So what else? Plants are non-motile, so you will never see a fern get up and walk away because it can't. So plants are non-motile. It's another characteristic. They reproduce sexually, not asexually. And we are going to talk extensively about plants' reproductive systems. Get excited. A little bit today, and then a little bit on Friday, I think. So, and like we already said, they are always autotrophs, which means that they get their energy from the sun by performing the process of photosynthesis. So they make their own food. We've already talked about the process of photosynthesis a lot, but if you need a quick refresher, they take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They take up water from the soil with their roots. They mix those together with energy from the sun, and they form C6H12O6, or glucose, which is basically just sugar. And that's how they get their energy, is from breaking that sugar down. Oh, and they also produce oxygen, which is awesome for us. So, thank goodness. We've got over 500,000 characterized species of plants. This is a massive kingdom. And then there are probably tons that we have not yet classified, which means that we haven't had the chance to get out there and look at every single one and be like, oh, this is definitely this, and this is why, here's a name for it, blah, 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 blah. I'm a scientist. So let's talk about how plants perform photosynthesis. Just a little bit. I know you already got this in Bio 1, so I'm not super concerned with this stuff. So plants perform the process of photosynthesis with photosynthetic pigments called chlorophyll that are inside of the plastids, inside of their chloroplasts in their cells. So those are a lot of words. So we've got chlorophyll, which is the pigment that actually does the photosynthesizing. We've got plastids, which are those like stacks of pancakes looking things like this. And those are all inside of chloroplasts, which are the specialized organelles that live inside of the cells of plants. Just like we have mitochondria. Plants also have mitochondria, but they also have chloroplasts. We don't. So, that's how plants get their energy. And now let's talk about our plant groups. So we have 5 groups of plants. We're really only going to talk about 4 of them. The other one, I'm just going to write the name up here, tell you what it is, and then we're going to be done with it. Because like bacteria and archaea and protists, I just don't really care about them that much. Which doesn't mean they're not important. I'm just biased towards more cool plants. So, plants are classified based off of their body structure. So if they have special, real plant parts, like leaves, stems, and roots and stuff, their vascular system, if they have one or not, which is what we're going to talk about, and also how they reproduce. So our first group is Thallophyta, are thallophytes. These are the boring ones that we're not really going to talk about, that I don't really care about. So our thallophytes lack a well-defined body structure. like leaves, roots, and stems like every other plant has, so they're like weird. Pretty much this is just green and brown algae, which are not technically algae, but anyways, it doesn't matter all that much because we don't care about them. So, skipping over the thallophytes, weird algae stuff, don't care. To the much more exciting bryophyta. Woo, let's hear it for the bryophytes. These are our small non-vascular plants that we're going to talk about today. So this includes liverworts, hornworts, and the much less weird sounding mosses. And coming in at number 3, we've got the pteridophyta. Our pteridophytes have well-defined structures, so like the leaf, stem, roots stuff we were talking about, and they're also vascular, but they don't produce seeds, so they only reproduce through spores. So this is basically ferns and ferns' close relatives. Ferns. And then, number 4, getting into the real money here, we've got the gymnosperms. Gymnosperms are like pine trees. They're conifers, ginkgos, and their relatives. So these are vascular plants, they have well-defined structures, and they also produce seeds, but their seeds are exposed, which means that they're not covered up by something. What would that something be? Good question. Let's ask the angiosperms. So the angiosperms are also vascular plants like the gymnosperms. They also produce seeds like the gymnosperms, but they don't just leave them out there naked and exposed. They cover up their seeds with fruit. So our angiosperms are our fruiting and flowering plants. So all of our wildflowers, fruit trees, most trees that we think of that aren't conifers are our lovely angiosperms. But we are not talking about those today. Today we are talking about the non-vascular plants, the bryophytes. So our non-vascular plants, they've got the differentiated body structures of a plant. So they've got the roots, the stem, and the leaves, but they do not have a vascular system. A plant's vascular system is like our circulatory system. So our circulatory system carries blood around our bodies, which then carries like sugar and oxygen and everything that our cells need around our body. Plants' vascular systems are the same thing. So they're carrying water and sugar and nutrients around the plant's body. So non-vascular plants, our bryophytes, don't have that. So they have to figure out other ways to live, basically. Our bryophytes were our very first plants to arrive on the scene, the first plants to evolve. So they're the oldest, which is pretty cool. Again, these are our liverworts, our hornworts, and our mosses. And so they don't have that specialized conductive tissue that make up the vascular system, so they can't transport water and nutrients throughout their bodies. So what they do is they take in water through their cell walls through osmosis, which is like the process of water moving through a membrane, and they take in minerals through diffusion, which is like non-water things moving through a membrane. You learned about this in bio. Not here to teach you that. So what this means is that they can't get really big because they can't move water from one part of their body up their stem to another part of their body. So they can't be as tall as a tree or even grass because they can't move water up their body. So that's why moss stays really teeny tiny, because they need to have water in their cells, but to do that they gotta be in water. So they also need water for their reproductive cycle, which we are going to talk about now. So plants, all plants that we're going to talk about, so our bryophytes, what we're talking about now, our ferns and our gymnosperms and our angiosperms have a weird reproductive cycle that is called the alternation of generations. So they have 2 kind of generations per life. So they've got 2 stages of their life, essentially, where they take up 2 different bodies, but it's considered the same lifespan. So they've got 2 forms, basically. They've got their gametophyte form and then they've got their sporophyte form. Gametophyte, sporophyte. Weird terms, but you'll get them. So the gametophyte produces gametes. Gametes are like eggs and sperm. So those fuse to fertilize and become a zygote, which then grows into an organism, right? So the gametophyte produces gametes. Those gametes become organisms. What they become is called the sporophyte. So the sporophyte is the gametes like all grown up. The sporophyte makes spores. When the spore grows up, it becomes the gametophyte. So it's a cycle. The gametophyte produces gametes that become the sporophyte. The sporophyte produces spores that becomes the gametophyte. So this is much easier to explain looking at a diagram like this that's in your notes. So if you follow along in the notes with me, this will be easier than me having to hold it up to the camera or redraw it on the whiteboard. So this is our bryophyte life cycle. So this is like a moss, basically. So these are teeny tiny, right? Like this small. So these are our gametophytes. This is what you think of when you think of moss. The gametophyte body is what is the moss, basically. So bryophytes are what we call gametophyte dominant, which means their main life stage, the one that we see, is the gametophyte stage. So the moss itself is a gametophyte. It produces a sporophyte, which then in turn produces the moss again. So let's take a look. So you've got the gametophytes. Some are male, some are female. The male produces the sperm in what's called the antheridia up here. The female produces the egg in what's called the archegonia at the top of the female gametophyte. That's when water comes into play. If there's no water, there's no reproduction, no fertilization. So once water comes along, it catches the sperm in a water droplet and drops it off into the archegonia where the egg is. So water carries the sperm to the egg, and what happens? Bada boom, bada bing, fertilization. Beautiful. So the egg becomes fertilized by the sperm, and within that archegonia, still in that female gametophyte, the diploid zygote starts to grow. Diploid means it's got 2 times chromosomes, so like every, not normal, but like we have 2 times chromosomes, we are diploid. When we reproduce, we give a haploid gamete, so like an egg is haploid, which means it has 1 times the chromosome, and then when it joins with the other gamete, then it's got 2 times the chromosome. So sperm's got 1, the egg has another, they join, now they have double chromosomes, which is called diploid. So our diploid zygote grows inside the mother moss thing, and it forms a fully grown sporophyte. If you've ever seen moss with those little things sticking up out of it with like a little capsule on top, they're like those little brown stems coming out of moss, and you can like brush your hand against it and it like feels cool. Those are sporophytes. So that's what the sporophyte looks like. It's a stem coming up from the top of the gametophyte with a capsule at the top. And that capsule is full of spores. So through mitosis, it produces spores. Through mitosis, it grows. Through meiosis, it produces spores. The spores are released, and once they hit the ground, if they happen to hit moist ground where there is water, they will grow into a gametophyte. So that is the overly complicated life cycle of moss. Aren't you glad you know that now? I am. So, that is it for today. We talked about the plant kingdom, specifically non-vascular plants. On Wednesday, we are going to talk about our vascular plants, which are arguably more interesting. But for today, do your questions, get the notes. I'll see you on Google Hangout. Bye.